Welcome. Today we're diving into cybersecurity architecture, specifically identity and access management, or IAM. Really fundamental stuff this is. You can kind of think of it as like the foundation of a solid cybersecurity uh, posture, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. You know how, like, in the past, we would always rely so heavily on firewalls and physical barriers to kind of protect our systems?
Yeah.
Well, IAM is kind of like the new perimeter in today's digital landscape.
Oh, that's interesting. So instead of guarding like a castle, we're checking IDs at like every door inside the castle.
Exactly. Yeah, IAM is all about controlling access at a much more like granular level. It's about making sure that, only the right people have access to only the right resources and nothing more.
Okay, so how do we actually like put this into practice? I've seen a lot of talk about like the four A's of IAM. Can you break that down?
Yeah, definitely. So the four A's, administration, authentication, authorization, and audit. These are like a really useful framework for understanding like all the core principles of IAM.
I do love a good acronym, but what do they actually mean in practice?
Well, think of it like, entering a secure building.
Okay.
So like administration would be like getting your ID card.
Huh?
It's about setting up and managing user accounts and determining what access each user has.
Oh, so it's like the onboarding process for digital access.
Exactly. Yeah. Then there's authentication, which is like where you actually prove that you are who you say you are, just like showing your ID card to the security guard at the entrance.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Then authorization is like figuring out which floors or rooms you can access. Like you might have your ID checked again to make sure you're allowed to be in that specific area.
Okay.
And finally, we have audit, which is like the security cameras that track who went where and when. It's all about keeping a record of activity for, accountability and security.
That's a really helpful way to visualize it. So we have this layered approach, starting with establishing who has access to what. But how is all of this user information like actually stored and managed?
That's where directories come in. They're like specialized filing cabinets for user data. A lot of organizations will use something called Active Directory, which you've probably encountered in your work.
Oh yeah, Active Directory, I've heard of that.
Sure.
Okay, so once we have this solid foundation for storing and managing user information, we can start diving into the first A, administration.
Right. Administration is all about making sure the right people have the right access. And this includes like creating new accounts, updating existing ones, and deleting accounts that are no longer needed. You can kind of think of it like an HR department for digital identities.
Makes sense. It sounds like a pretty crucial part of the process,
Yeah.
especially like in large organizations where people are constantly joining and leaving.
Yeah, absolutely. And to manage this effectively, organizations often use identity management systems or identity governance systems.
Okay.
These systems help automate and streamline the process of managing user access, making sure it's all done efficiently and securely.
So they're like automated gatekeepers, ensuring only authorized personnel have the keys to specific areas.
That's a great way to think about it, yeah. These systems often use something called role-based access control, meaning that permissions are granted based on predefined roles within the organization. And this like simplifies the process of managing access and, reduces the chance of errors.
Yeah, this all seems critical for keeping things like organized and secure,
Yeah.
especially with so many employees and different levels of access. What about the next A, authentication? That feels particularly relevant in today's world with all the data breaches and cyber attacks and everything.
Authentication is all about proving who you are. Traditionally, this has involved things, like passwords, things you have, like a physical token or your mobile phone, and things you are, such as biometrics, like your fingerprint.
But passwords can be pretty vulnerable, right? I mean, they can be easily forgotten, shared, or even stolen. And this really seems to be pushing for a move beyond the traditional password.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Passwords alone are no longer enough. That's why there's a big push towards multi-factor authentication, or MFA. MFA requires you to provide at least two different types of authentication factors.
So instead of just a password, you might also need to enter a code sent to your phone or scan your fingerprint.
Exactly. MFA makes it much harder for attackers to gain access, even if they manage to steal one of your authentication factors. It's a major step towards creating a more secure online environment.
Sounds like a win-win for security and peace of mind. But I'm curious about how MFA works with something like single sign-on or SSO.
Mhm.
Is it possible to have strong security without a million logins?
Absolutely. SSO is all about streamlining the login process, allowing you to access multiple applications with just one set of credentials.
That sounds incredibly convenient, especially for those of us who juggle multiple systems for work. But doesn't that kind of create a single point of failure? If your SSO credentials are compromised, wouldn't an attacker have access to everything?
That's a valid concern. That's why SSO implementation should always be paired with strong authentication mechanisms like MFA.
Oh, so it's like having a master key that still requires multiple locks to open the door.
Exactly. SSO enhances convenience for users, while MFA ensures robust security.
Okay, so MFA and SSO work hand in hand. What about the third A, authorization? It's not just about who you are, but also what you can do once you're in, right?
Right. Authorization kicks in after you've been authenticated. It determines what you're allowed to do within a system, like what files you can access, what data you can modify, or what actions you can perform.
I'm assuming this is where things get a bit more complex, especially when you consider all the different types of users and their specific roles within an organization.
Yeah, you're right. Authorization needs to be both granular and context dependent. And that's where risk-based authorization comes in.
Risk-based authorization. Tell me more.
Imagine you're using online banking. Checking your account balance is a low-risk action. But if you try to initiate a large fund transfer, the system might require additional verification steps, like entering a one-time code or answering security questions.
Oh, so it's like the system is constantly evaluating the level of risk and adjusting security measures accordingly.
Precisely. Risk-based authorization considers factors like your location, the type of request you're making, how often you perform certain actions, and even your past behavior to determine the appropriate level of security.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's almost like having a security guard who is constantly adjusting their level of scrutiny based on the situation. But what about those with higher levels of access? I'm thinking about system administrators
Right.
or anyone with, the keys to the kingdom. How do we protect against those accounts being compromised?
That's where Privileged Access Management, or PAM, comes into play. It's a critical piece of IAM that focuses on securing those highly privileged accounts that have, broad access and control over systems and data.
I imagine that's a pretty high stakes area, given like the potential for damage if those accounts are compromised.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Weak PAM practices, such as shared accounts or passwords that never change, are unfortunately more common than you'd think. And a compromised privileged account can have, catastrophic consequences.
So PAM isn't just telling sysadmins to use better passwords.
It's much more than that. PAM systems enforce strong authentication, like MFA for privileged users, control access to those accounts, by ensuring only authorized personnel can use them at specific times and for specific purposes, and provide detailed audit trails.
So it's like putting those keys to the kingdom in a secure vault with multiple locks and cameras constantly monitoring who comes and goes.
Exactly. It's about layering security measures to make sure that privileged access is tightly controlled and monitored, minimizing the risk of abuse or compromise.
Okay, so we've covered secure storage, strong authentication, granular authorization, and PIM. But how do we know if all of these measures are actually working? That's where the final A, audit, comes in, right?
Right. Audit is all about verifying that the other three A's are functioning correctly and that security policies are being followed. It involves analyzing logs, monitoring system activity, and looking for any unusual behavior that could signal a security breach.
So it's kind of like a quality control check for the whole IAM system.
That's a great way to put it. Audit is crucial because it helps us identify potential issues early on and take corrective action. This often involves tools like security information and event management systems, or SEMS, and user behavior analytics, or UBA.
I've heard of SEM and UBA. They
Uh,
sound pretty sophisticated.
They are. SAM systems analyze security logs from various sources to provide a centralized view of all the security events happening within an organization. Meanwhile, UBA focuses on understanding user behavior patterns and detecting any deviations that might signal malicious activity.
So it's not just about reacting to individual security events, but also proactively looking for potential threats by analyzing patterns and trends.
Exactly. UBA can be incredibly powerful in detecting things like insider threats or compromised accounts because it can spot subtle changes in user behavior that might not be caught by traditional security tools.
Can you give me like an example of how UBA might be used in a real-world scenario?
Sure, imagine an employee who suddenly starts accessing sensitive files they've never accessed before, working odd hours, and sending large amounts of data outside the company. This unusual activity pattern might trigger an alert in a UBA system, prompting a closer investigation.
So it's like having a security detective who is constantly observing user behavior and looking for clues that something might be wrong.
That's a perfect analogy. UBA adds a level of intelligence to security monitoring that goes beyond simply reacting to obvious red flags.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground with like the four A's of IAM, but this hints at something beyond just like the traditional enterprise focus.
Yeah.
It mentions things like federation and the difference between workforce IAM and consumer IAM.
Yeah, you're right. IAM is starting to expand beyond the confines of a single organization. Federation, for instance, allows for secure access across different organizations or domains, making it easier for people to collaborate and share resources securely.
Is it about building secure bridges between different IAM systems?
Exactly. And when we talk about workforce IAM versus consumer IAM, we're recognizing that there are different needs and priorities for employees accessing internal systems compared to like customers interacting with public-facing applications.
So I'm guessing the focus shifts from security to user experience when we're talking about consumer IAM.
Right. For employees, security is often the top priority. But for customers, the experience needs to be smooth and seamless, or they'll just go elsewhere.
Yeah, it seems like finding that balance between security and convenience is key for any successful IAM implementation.
Absolutely. It's about understanding the context and tailoring your approach accordingly.
Okay, we've only just scratched the surface of IAM, but it's clear that it's like a complex and fascinating world with a lot of moving parts.
It definitely is. But hopefully, this conversation has helped demystify some of the key concepts and highlighted why IAM is so crucial for protecting our digital lives. And these concepts aren't just for big organizations, you know. They apply to like our personal digital lives as well.
That's something I've been thinking about. We all have so many online accounts these days, right? Email, social media, banking, shopping. It can be kind of overwhelming to think about managing all of them securely. How can we apply these IAM principles to improve our own cybersecurity?
Well, it all starts with awareness. You know, recognize that each of those accounts is like a potential entry point for attackers. Strong, unique passwords are like essential. And enabling MFA wherever possible is a huge step forward.
Yeah, it's funny how we often take more care with our work accounts than our personal ones, even though the stakes can be just as high, if not higher.
That's a common blind spot, yeah. We tend to think, well, what could a hacker possibly want with my cat photos on Instagram? But the reality is, a compromised social media account can be used for identity theft, spreading misinformation, or even like launching attacks against other people.
So it's not just about protecting our data, but also preventing our accounts from being used against others.
Exactly. And remember how we talked about the importance of automation and centralized management for organizations? Well, there are tools out there like password managers that can help us do the same thing for our personal accounts.
Oh, password managers are a lifesaver. I used to be terrible with passwords, but a password manager has been like a game changer. It generates and stores strong passwords, can have built-in MFA, and even alerts you if your credentials have been compromised in a data breach.
Yeah, they're a great example of how, like, the principles of enterprise IAM can be adapted for personal use. It's all about taking control of our digital identities and being proactive about our security.
It sounds like good IAM is as much about mindset as it is about technology.
Absolutely. It's about developing, like, good digital hygiene habits. Just like washing your hands prevents the spread of germs, practicing good IAM habits can help prevent the spread of cyber threats.
I love that analogy, but it also makes me realize how important education is. Most people don't even know what IAM is, let alone understand why it's so important.
Yeah, that's a real challenge. We
Yeah.
need to do a better job of like demystifying IAM and making it accessible to everyone. It shouldn't be this exclusive club for IT professionals, you know? We all need a basic understanding of these principles.
Maybe we need a cybersecurity for dummies guide with clear explanations and practical tips.
I like that idea. I can already picture the cover. A cartoon hacker getting thwarted by a giant password manager. But in all seriousness, we can't ignore the fact that there are real threats out there,
Mhm.
malicious actors, insider threats, targeted attacks. These are all things that we need to be aware of.
It's a reminder that cybersecurity is like an ongoing arms race. As defenders build stronger defenses, the attackers are just developing new ways to circumvent them. It feels like a constant game of cat and mouse.
You're exactly right. That's why we need to stay informed about emerging threats, adopt new technologies, and like continually adapt our security practices.
So where's IAM headed in the future? What trends should we be keeping an eye on?
Well, there are some exciting developments on the horizon. We're likely to see a continued shift toward passwordless authentication, increased use of AI and machine learning to like enhance security and user experience, and a greater focus on identity verification and fraud prevention.
So it sounds like IAM is going to become even more intelligent, automated, and like integrated into our digital lives.
Exactly. And I think we'll also see a convergence of workforce IAM and consumer IAM, as the lines between our professional and personal digital identities become more and more blurred, the need for a unified approach to identity management will become increasingly important.
That raises an interesting question. Like, imagine a future where we have a single, secure digital identity that we use for everything. That's both exciting and a bit unsettling, isn't it?
It's a powerful concept for sure, and it comes with like both opportunities and challenges. Digital identity platforms and like decentralized identity solutions are starting to emerge, offering individuals more control over their data and how it's used.
So instead of having our information like scattered across countless databases, we could have a single, secure vault that we control.
That's the idea. It could simplify our digital lives while also giving us greater control over our privacy and security.
This has been a fascinating look at the evolving world of IAM. We've covered a lot of ground, from the basic principles to the latest trends and future possibilities. It really feels like we're at the beginning of this IAM journey.
Yeah, we've covered a lot,
Yeah.
but there's always more to explore. It's a such a rapidly evolving field
Yeah.
with like constant innovations and new challenges emerging all the time.
Yeah, it's amazing to think how much it's evolved, from those early days of just simple passwords and access control lists. And now we're talking about sophisticated systems that use AI and biometrics and
Yeah.
even like decentralized identity solutions.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling.
It is, and I think one of the most exciting areas to watch is like the development of decentralized identity.
Yeah.
It has the potential to transform how we manage our digital identities, how we interact online.
Yeah, I can see how that would be empowering for like individuals,
Yeah.
Having more control over your data and how it's used is becoming increasingly important in our digital world. But it also sounds like a huge technical challenge.
It is. It is. There are a lot of technical hurdles to overcome,
Yeah.
but there's also a lot of momentum and innovation happening in this space. I'm pretty optimistic about the potential for decentralized identity to create a more secure and user-centric online experience.
Okay, so before we wrap up, if there was just one key takeaway our listeners should remember from this conversation, what would it be?
I think it's simple, really. Identity is the new battleground of cybersecurity. We need to be vigilant about protecting our digital identities, both, personally and professionally.
That's a powerful statement. Identity is the new battleground. It really drives home the point that cybersecurity isn't just about protecting machines and networks, but also protecting ourselves.
Exactly. It's a battle we can win, but only if we're informed, engaged, and proactive.
Yeah, so to our listeners, I encourage you to take a moment to think about your own digital hygiene. Are you using strong, unique passwords for all your accounts? Have you enabled MFA wherever possible? Are you staying informed about the latest phishing scams and social engineering tactics?
Knowledge is power. The more you understand about IAM, about the evolving threat landscape, the better equipped you'll be to protect yourself and the people you care about.
Well, this has been a fantastic journey into the world of IAM. We've only scratched the surface, but hopefully we've given our listeners a better understanding of why it's so important.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure exploring this complex, fascinating field with you.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. Stay safe and stay informed.